What's up? This is Everybody Settle Down. I am Charlie Marlow. That is the great Eric Messersmith. Eric, two questions. First, of course, how are you doing? But also, look, I looked at the betting odds. Donald Trump is back to being your betting favorite to win the 2024 election. Who'd have thought? Who'd have thunk it?
Yeah, I'm doing okay, Charlie. Better than Biden if you care about the betting markets. And we talk about this, and Trump had been ahead for a long time, and then in recent weeks, as you and I discussed, Biden took a very slight lead. Well, now this week, I just checked today, Trump is ahead. Electionbettingodds.com right now, 45.5% Trump, 44.4% Biden. Similar on Real Clear Politics when they aggregate the betting markets as well. So it just kind of shows you that I think what happened this week, which was Trump had a pretty good week, highlighted by the CNN poll that came out Sunday that had Trump by 6, which was a pretty big, healthy margin in a major poll. And there was another poll from Harvard Harris that had him up by 4, I think. So those came out back to back, and the margins were even wider when you had the five-way race with Kennedy and Cornel West and Jill Stein. I think the margins in those two polls were Trump by 7 and Trump by 9. So Trump had a really good polling week with those results, and that increased his lead because we've been talking about for a while how Biden had been drifting in a positive direction, had gotten the race back to tied. Well, now Trump is ahead by a point and a half or so in the aggregate average because of that polling. It looks like he maintains his slight lead in most of the swing states. So a pretty good week for Trump. He bounces back in front.
Okay, so my question to you though is why do you think that's the case? Now, the last couple weeks, I think the peak that I saw once Biden went ahead in terms of the election betting odds was he was up, I think, 2.3%. We did an episode where it was 2.2%. So they update this almost by the minute. So right now it's Trump 45.5% to Biden 44.4%. So really though, the odds have shifted about 3.5% towards Trump just since last week or so. What do you think the reason for that is? I think, the protests are getting a lot more attention, and we're going to get to that. I think we both agree that the steady climb, the steady climb from Biden from the State of the Union, you just kind of saw incremental change, positivity for Biden. But it seems like that hit a roadblock just about 3 4 days ago. What do you think is the reason for this trend?
Well, before we say it's a trend, let's first put out the caveat that it just could be noise. I mean, when a race is this close and the polling average goes from tied 0 to Trump by 1.5, which is where it is now, that's not a massive move. And also when the betting odds, when Biden's favored 45-44 and now Trump's favored 45-44, that is, very small too. It's worth noting. It's interesting and it could be important, but it's not necessarily the start of a trend. It may just be Trump had a couple of good polls. For instance, an NPR poll came out the other day that had Biden ahead by 2, NPR PBS. So that was the first one in a while where Biden had a lead. So the question is this just the noise of the campaign? Or is this a signal that the momentum that you talked about, that we've been talking about for weeks now, where Biden seemed to have some gradual momentum, has that now stopped and maybe even reversed in Trump's favor? We obviously won't know until we have some more weeks of data. But if that is the case, then that's obviously a really bad sign for Biden because it shows that it got him close, but not quite over the hump in terms of being the leader with 6 months or so to go. And look, I think the things that hurt Biden are, and maybe you're leading to this, are kind of the same things that have been out there, namely inflation. I think that is the issue that continues to linger. And it's not just inflation. I think it's more, maybe better stated, inflation plus interest rates being high. And there was a sense that the inflation was coming down at such a strong pace, which it was, that the Fed was going to be able to cut interest rates multiple times this year. I think they were forecasting at the beginning of the year 3 or 4 cuts. The markets were saying as many as 6 or 7 cuts this year. So there was a lot of optimism. And we saw January, February, March, the inflation numbers, they didn't shoot back up, but they kind of went sideways. And the Fed at their meeting the other day kept interest rates stable. And they said, hey, look, we have seen a backslide in inflation progress, and they think that it'll still be okay, that we're not necessarily headed back up toward dramatic inflation increases, but we haven't gotten that last mile. We had the pretty dramatic slowdown in inflation, getting it down from say 9% in the CPI down to about 3.5, which is a big drop. But getting it now from 3.5 back to 2, which is what their goal is, that kind of last mile, that has proven to be pretty difficult. And as a result, interest rates have stayed high. And I think that sense of those high prices, people stuck in their mortgages who can't get out because they have a low mortgage rate. Maybe they want to buy a house, but they can't turn a 4% mortgage rate they have now into a 6 or 7 or 8% rate by going out. I think that, not to mention car loans and credit cards, I think that just weighing on people and the kind of nostalgia for the Trump years of low inflation, even though there were a bunch of other things going on during the Trump years, but inflation was low, during his presidency. So I think that lingering later into the year is hurting Biden. And also, I think these protests are hurting Biden because, as we talked about last week, he's getting a lot of heat from both sides. We know the protesters, the anti-Israeli people, pro-Palestinian people, they're mad as hell at Biden. They blame him for this. And lately, a lot of pro-Israel people think he's been a little too hard on Israel, nudging them a little too much when it comes to their conduct of the war, and not being as supportive as he should be, and not speaking out. And I think this part I think is a fair criticism, not speaking out forcefully enough about some of these protests that have gone too far. He finally did that today. We're recording this on Thursday. He finally did that this morning, came out with a statement. But where the hell has he been? I mean, he could have made the same statement 2 or 3 days ago. This isn't hard. We talked about this last week. It's really easy. It's protesting is fine. Say what you want. Freedom of speech, freedom of press. Don't destroy shit. Don't break into buildings. Don't vandalize. Don't threaten people. Don't take over parts of the university and refuse to leave. I mean, this isn't rocket science, right? And he should have come out days ago to blunt this. So I don't know to what extent that has hurt him, but I don't think it's played well for him. I think it's been a win for Trump, because Trump did come out pretty forcefully and condemn this stuff over the course of this week. He jumped the gun on that, got it in front of Biden, and called Biden out for not saying anything.
Okay, and so everybody knows. I think sometimes too when we talk about polling, and if I put a headline on one of these videos and it says that Biden is favored, now that's different in the betting odds, or Biden is trending well. I think we also need to kind of reiterate that look, Joe Biden won with a 4.5% popular vote win in 2020. And I think you and I mean, you tell me, I'm guessing you'd agree. I mean, if the popular vote is tied, Donald Trump probably wins this election. Even if, let's say, Joe Biden only wins the popular vote by 1%, 2%, that still probably means Donald Trump wins the Electoral College. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Obviously, we know Georgia with the 11,000 votes. I just looked it up. Wisconsin was 21,000 votes. Pennsylvania was 80,000. Was there another state that was even closer than
Did you mention
Pennsylvania?
Arizona?
Would that have
Arizona?
would that have flipped the election though? What I'm trying to say is there were so many states that were so close. I think
Yeah.
sometimes when people say, "Oh," like let's say Joe Biden is ahead, just hypothetically. Let's say he's ahead by 1 point in the popular vote. That means Donald Trump is probably winning this election. I think sometimes we forget Joe Biden is probably going to need, I would think, to win in a popular vote by 4 or 5% to win this election again.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, look, you never know for sure because we don't know exactly how these really close states are going to break. But I think a good rule of thumb would be if the popular vote is tied or Trump is ahead, it's almost a certainty that Trump's going to win the electoral college. I mean, I don't, close to 100%. If it's in the Biden by say 5+ points, I think it's probably close to 100% that Biden wins. If it's in between that, it's probably advantage Trump. And if it's 1 or 2 points for Biden, maybe even 3, that's probably 50-50 or even Trump favored to win. Because remember, Clinton beat Trump in 2016 by about 2 or 2.5% and lost the popular vote or the electoral college, I should say. So you very well could see that again. And I would say I would feel better if you just told me nothing else other than Biden wins by 2 points. I'd probably tell you I'd take Trump to win the electoral college. If you told me Biden by 3, I'd probably still take Trump, although I think it gets kind of close there. You told me Biden by 4 or 5. Now I'd probably say Biden's, slightly favored. And anything more than that, I think Biden would definitely win. But that's the advantage that Donald Trump has with the electoral college. And it's a huge thing to keep track of as we get closer to November. I think so that's an advantage for Trump. I think there is an advantage for Biden in some of this polling that is beneath kind of the top line level. And a lot of the polling I've seen, when you really when these polling outlets really try to filter the electorate based on who is likely to vote, Biden typically does better. So when you just ask people, are you registered to vote? Yes, fine. Who are you voting for? And then you take that same survey and you try to ask them, you just ask them, are you likely to vote? Or you look at or you ask them, what have you done in your past history, which is kind of how they try to get to who's likely to vote. Biden usually does better. And the NPR Marist poll that came out this week is a good example of that. Biden was up by 5. So his lead went from 2 to 5. And in a 5-way race with the other candidates in there, it went from Biden Trump tied when it was just who are you going to vote for to Biden +3 over Trump when it was voting. So usually what happens with polling outlets, and this is kind of a nerdy polling thing, early in races, they tend to just do it based on who's registered to vote in their samples. But typically they put filters in as you get closer to try to screen likely voters, because I mean, what polling is trying to do is capture the electorate, right? So they're trying to be accurate, and different companies have different ways to do this, but they have systems to try to screen it so that you are getting people who are most likely to vote. And based on a lot of polling I've seen so far, when that has happened, Biden does a couple of points better. So if that continues, that's obviously going to be very beneficial for Biden as we get closer to the election.
And you mentioned Arizona, by the way. Yeah, so Biden won Arizona 49.36% to 49.06%. So 0.3%. It was about what, 10,000 plus
Yeah,
votes there
10,000 or
in
so.
Arizona. And so we can roll this into the protesting thing, because I'm always curious of just of why the polls shift. I think a lot of times it has things to do with, what are people seeing in the news? What are they feeling? Again, the inflation is something where I agree. I think if inflation doesn't continue to go down over the next 6 7 months, I think it's going to be very hard for Joe Biden to win this election. The protest thing, it I try not to be in a bubble. I don't think I live in a bubble. I I don't really watch a ton of news on TV, but I see this all the time on social media. And you mentioned with what Biden should have said, which is easy, which is just like, hey, you're allowed to protest, right? It's one of your rights. It's one of the rights that is the foundation of this country. Just don't be violent, and that's pretty simple. And my thing with this whole Israel Palestine Hamas deal is it's kind of similar. Where look, Israel 100% has the right to defend itself, get the hostages back. Hamas is horrible, but let's also try maybe not to kill as many civilians. I feel like that's a pretty practical conclusion there. The thing with the protests, at first I'm like, this is dumb. And then it keeps staying in the news. And maybe this isn't good, but I do feel like sometimes I consume some of these news stories through the dumbest stuff on social media. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like
Oh, yeah,
like
absolutely.
at first I'm like, it's on every big time Ivy League campus. Well, now it's at Wash U here in St. Louis. It's happening everywhere. I see a lot of dumb comments. Then you see the frat bros at North Carolina. You probably saw them. They defended the
Yes.
flag. You got the dudes in their
Yes.
popped collars and their Vineyard Vine shirts. and then there's a GoFundMe for these guys. Last time I looked, it was something like $125,000 to throw these frat bros a rager, just a raging party. I'll look it
I
up
love it.
once I throw it to you. I want to see what the total is for these dudes defending the flag. And I don't know. I just like to me, I get it. I don't feel like these protesters are going to be revered in the way that the Vietnam
No.
protesters were. And by the way, a lot of times these anti-war protesters end up being correct. They're on the right side of history. I don't know. Maybe I'm being unfair. I don't know if they're going about it the right way. I also think with some of these kids, to me, it seems so much about social media. Like everything is, and by the way, I think all these kids should be able to go to their classes and whatnot, but it's always somebody like videotaping themselves. They're like, here I am, I'm trying to get to my economics class and I can't get in. And by the way,
Yeah.
here's this wall of very petite women, by the way, that I feel like they could easily just kind of walk through. I don't know. Maybe there's different degrees to this. What do you think? It does seem like at first I'm like, this is nothing, but it's lingering. It's lingering.
It is. It's gained a lot of momentum. I think there's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon, people who really aren't sure exactly what they're protesting for, and also outside agitators, professional protesters. When they went into Columbia and NYU, and the police at Columbia, they took over a building, the protesters, and when the police went in and cleared them out, of the 250 some people arrested at those two schools in New York, roughly half were not students. So that just shows you this is not all organic student led. This is some of it is outside people, outside groups funding them, giving them infrastructure. So that's some of it. In terms of the students being blocked, like you're right, social media plays a big role in this because those video clips, some of them are just kind of funny or silly, but some of them kind of galvanize support. And I think the one I saw was out here at UCLA, where encampment was just torn down last night near where I live. There was a Jewish student who was blocked from getting to his class, and he was filming it. And there were women there. There were also men who stepped in front of him, and he tried to get through. He's like, I'm going to get through. I'm going to my class. And they would not let him through. And that is just, look, no matter how you feel about what's going on in Gaza, that's ludicrous that a Jewish student or any student is being blocked from going to a class by people on campus. That's absurd. And I put a lot of blame on the administration of some of these schools who didn't handle this the right way, and they empowered these student groups. Like what happened to Columbia with taking over the building, that only happened because they allowed the tent encampment to go on for so long, even after they put a deadline out there. And you've seen other universities handle this completely differently. Like the University of Florida, they just shut it down. They're like, we're not doing this. And I love the University of Florida. They put out a statement in response to the arrests of protesters. And they said, this is not complicated. The University of Florida is not a daycare, and we do not treat protesters like children. They knew the rules, they broke the rules, and they will face the consequences. For many days, we have patiently told protesters, many of whom are outside agitators, that they were able to exercise their right to free speech and free assembly. We also told them that clearly prohibited activities would result in a trespassing order, and we consistently reiterated those rules. And that's exactly how you got to handle this stuff, and it would lead to it wouldn't you would keep this stuff from escalating into some of the things we've seen if it would have been handled that way. But in terms of Biden, I just think it was a missed opportunity to get out earlier and say essentially what he said today forcefully. Look, we talked about this kind of with the train derailment in East Palestine and the border. These are all different issues. They're all unique to some degree. But the point is, we live in a world with not just 24/7 news, but now the internet. And so everything is happening instantaneously all the time. And so you got to get on top of these stories. And yes, is some of it political theater, like when Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, went to Columbia the other day? He was getting booed. Yeah, of course it's political, but he was there. He was making a statement. He was getting media coverage. That is the game. Part of politics is the showmanship of it, right? And that is one of the things Trump understands, like at his core. Trump is he understands the showmanship aspect of politics. That's part of the game. Is it as serious as like the legislating and getting laws passed and executive policy? No, it's not, but it's important. And also it's not just theater. It shows people where you stand and who you're with and what your priorities are. And it gives you an opportunity to come out and articulate your vision. And I think that is where Biden missed an opportunity. And I feel like it's part of a larger pattern with Biden. And on this issue in particular, we know why, right? It's because he knows that part of the base of his party that is very anti-Israel and very pro the Palestinians is rebelling against him, particularly young people. And they're afraid, especially in states like Michigan and Wisconsin, this is really going to hurt them and potentially cost them the election. And so they're very careful in terms of what they say. But it reminds me of like a sporting event. The Biden team reminds me of a team that thinks that they're ahead and they can just kind of sit on the ball, like a football team running
Mhm.
out the clock, or a basketball team kind of taking the air out of the ball. And I think that's the kind of campaign they're running. And I don't know that they're right on that judgment. I think this is much closer to a jump ball as the polling and the betting odds would indicate. And I feel like when it is a jump ball, you have to approach it differently and you have to be willing to take more swings. It's like when you go into a big game, if you are the underdog or if you're, in a game that's pretty evenly matched, you're more willing to be aggressive, right? As you should be. You're more willing to try different things, to not just run out the clock. And I think that's how the Biden campaign needs to play this a little bit. And again, I'm not saying you go out and you burn a bridge with your base for no reason or you just take crazy chances. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when an opportunity presents itself, and this week was a golden example of that, you have a chance to show yourself to the majority of the people who look at these protests and think this is ridiculous, and show that you support Israel, that you condemn this anti-Semitism and this lawlessness, and that you have some balance and sanity on the issue. That's a missed opportunity because remember, a lot of these hardcore people, you've already lost them. They ain't coming back. You know what I mean? Like they're not coming to you in 6 months. No matter how nice you are to them, no matter how much you soften your criticism or try to appease them, they're gone. And you need to replace their votes with some people in the middle who don't have the same views about these protests specifically or about the war in Gaza more generally.
What's funny, I was laughing. I think you said something along the lines of, the base of the Democrat Party having some of these views. And I don't know what the percentage is, but I was chuckling because I feel like I've been a Democrat my whole life. I'm pretty much from Democrat families on both sides. And when I just think about growing up, what you thought it meant to be a Democrat, I just never considered, and when I say this, I'm not saying this in a pejorative, like the stance on Israel versus Palestine. I just kind of always thought that the United States, we were allies to Israel. I never knew this existed, basically. This type of sentiment. And again, the anti-Semitism is different than clearly what I'm saying, with a lot of reasonable people are just saying, yeah, of course we support Israel and what happened to them was terrible. Let's try to kill fewer civilians. I would say the same thing about what we did as a country in Iraq and Afghanistan going back 15, 20 years, whatever it is. And also, I think it's good you mentioned the out of town protesters. Sometimes we forget about that. And you and I, you were here for Ferguson too, right? You
Yeah.
remember as they started to arrest a lot of these people, there were a lot of people from New York. There were a lot of people that were not from the St. Louis area that were being arrested. And you also kind of talked about it being comical with the Columbia deal. I saw the woman talking, and I saw this clip. It was a couple minute exchange with a reporter, and she said basically, we just want to make sure we get our food and water in here. And the reporter was like, yeah, but you're doing this, you know, you can just leave. You can leave to get your food and water. It's not
Right.
like
Yes.
you're not a hostage. You can leave anytime you want if you want to get that food and water. And as I watched that, it's not apples to apples, but you probably remember this. It became a big national story. But do you remember when the University of Missouri football team had their deal with the hunger strike guy? I
Yes.
remember, so I went and
Yep.
covered this. And here's what happened. There was some racial unrest on campus. You had a young man who was going on a hunger strike. And then the team basically went to their coach, Gary Pinkel at the time, and said, look, we're not going to play this football game until things change. And I think some people don't realize how crazy that could have flipped college athletics if it went a different way. But I remember the team coming out and Gary Pinkel saying, we're doing this to save a man's life. And I get it. And I'm not downplaying what happened racially on the campus, but I'm kind of thinking, well, he's going on a hunger strike. You know what I'm saying? I get
Right.
it. I understand that hunger strikes are a means of protest. I understand that. But also, he could save his life anytime he wanted to by just eating or drinking water. And that's what I thought of when I watched this woman at Columbia. And you know what? Maybe it's not fair for me to focus. This is what I always rail against. I always rail against, you see the dumb stuff on social media. And unfortunately, I'm kind of focusing on just the dumb, funny stuff that I see amongst these protesters, but there is a lot of it. There is a lot of it.
There is, and that's the stuff that gets media coverage, and that's why I said Biden needs to be aggressive with this stuff. And you can't just look if they're. We'll see. They got 6 months, so it's a long time. But if this is going to be their strategy, that is really risky to me, because you can't just depend on Trump imploding. And maybe this week, what we talked about at the beginning of the episode shows that, right? Trump, after some rough polling for a few weeks, now slightly back in front in the polling, slightly back in front in the betting odds. He's on trial now, and yeah, he gets convicted for this first trial. Maybe the felony, if he gets convicted of felony, maybe that changes some people's minds. Maybe Trump doesn't says some crazy things and implodes, but I just don't think you can count on that. Like, we're getting close enough now where a lot of the craziness with Trump, and there is a lot of it, January 6th, trying to overturn the election, his various trials, some of the crazy shit he says, that's baked into the cake, at a certain point, right? And so just hoping that there's that collapse is not a winning strategy. And again, you don't go out of your way to bash your base. That is not what I'm saying. Every politician, including Biden, certainly needs his base. But what I'm saying, when an opportunity presents itself, I mean, think of another thing he could have said. He could have said, look, to these protesters out there on campus who want a ceasefire, I agree with you. I want a ceasefire too. So who you should be protesting against right now is Hamas, because Israel has put an offer on the table that Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, said the other day was incredibly generous and more. And he said Hamas needs to take it and they need to do it now. That is who you should be protesting against if you want a ceasefire right now, not Israel. Israel has made an offer, hostages for a ceasefire that is more than fair, and it is on Hamas now to do that. So Biden could have come out and essentially said what is the policy of his administration, what his own Secretary of State said, and I think it would give him a lot of credit, again, with kind of the normies in the middle, the people who are not on one extreme or the other on this issue. Because what's happening is the Democratic Party is changing in its attitude toward Israel from what it used to be. But that is not yet kind of the overall attitude writ large of the United States. And Biden's not trying to win a primary anymore. He's trying to win a general election. And if you look at the polling, Republicans and independents are very unhappy with the way Biden has handled this, not because they think he's been too easy on Israel, but because they think he's been too hard. So that is the tightrope that he does have to walk. So I give him a lot of credit for that, because I think he's done a pretty good job overall, and it is complicated. But this presented him that golden opportunity because of some of the excesses that you were talking about, to just, again, call out stuff. This is not hard. Where the hell was he? It's Thursday. He didn't say anything Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It was really a missed opportunity. And I hope for, if you believe that Biden, or if you want Biden to win, you should hope that this is not a sign of things to come.
Yeah, they do seem to be very slow on a lot of things. And some of these events, you mentioned the East Palestine train derailment. Unfortunately, or fortunately, if you're a Trump guy, in some of these big public events, it does matter to get there first. It does matter to be the first one to go out there and make a statement. And even Mayor Pete there said, I was too slow to react. And And look, even if Joe Biden gets on the phone with Governor DeWine and says, "What can I do?" Unfortunately, sometimes you have to do better PR about that, right? Because that's what people respond to. You know, I keep chuckling. It's just everything about this campaign, this election is funny to me in different ways. I'm about to be 42 years old this month, and I swear I've lived in Ohio, Michigan multiple times, Illinois, Missouri. I'm telling you, I never really saw any anti-Semitism. I have not in my life. Now, I've seen a lot of racism. I'm not going to lie. I've seen it in my schools and where I've lived and whatnot. I really haven't seen anti-Semitism. And in saying that, I'm not pretending like it doesn't exist. I guess it just surprises me at how much it's out there on the forefront. Like, here's a good example, and this was a joke, but like I was on the radio today. I was joking with the radio host, or he was joking with me, basically about, hey, look at that guy's party. That guy's party is the anti-Semitism party, and I'm thinking, 4 years ago it was Jews will not replace us at Charlottesville. 4 or
Right.
5 years ago, whenever I don't even remember what that was, 7 years ago, but it was like, oh, Republicans with the tiki torches, they're Jews will not replace us, they're the anti-Semites. And now 7 years later, now it's Democrats are now anti-Semites. Everybody's an anti-Semite. It's just it's weird to me. I just I've never really seen that in my life. I always thought about it more as a thing in Europe, to be honest with you. And I'm not even talking about going back clearly to like World War II and the Holocaust. But I guess I'm really surprised at this sentiment across our country. I never really experienced this. Did you?
Not as much from the left, no doubt about it. I think what you've seen is there is anti-Semitism on both the right and the left, and I think that is what we are seeing right now. But to be clear, a lot of we don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. There are people who will legitimately have issues with the Israeli government, and I would put myself in that camp, and especially Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that's not anti-Semitic, right? So we need to be clear
Right.
that criticizing the Israeli government in general, or criticizing even what they're doing in Gaza right now, that is not anti-Semitic. But you're right. There are slogans, there is intimidation, there are things that have happened that have come out of these protests that are unequivocally anti-Semitic. And those things absolutely need to be called out, and you need to fight back with the facts, and a lot of it I think is some of these people just don't kind of understand the situation and the history, and some of them I think are chanting things like from the river to the sea that they don't really know, they don't really understand what that means. They're just kind it's just kind of a chant that they're saying. So there's a mix of a lot of different things going on, and so I don't want to say that the protest is being driven primarily by anti-Semitism at all these
Right.
universities, because there are people who have legitimate critiques who are not anti-Semitic. But there is no question that anti-Semitism, whether it was at the heart of it at the beginning or not, has definitely seeped in. And that, I mean, that is, if you don't see that, then I think you have your head buried in the sand. And it shows you that yes, anti-Semitism is not just reserved for the kind of KKK fascist right. It exists on the other side as well.
All right, let's go from anti-Semitism to dog killing now. All right, keep along with the very positive topics. We have the
Well,
Michael
it's an
Vick of
uplifting
politics.
show. It's an uplifting show we present, Charlie.
Well, and that's why I feel like I shouldn't be laughing so much, but I really find all of it comical. I mean, and at the base of it is a lot of serious stuff going on, but I just feel like the way it's carried out, and I'm telling you, some of these protests, and I'll go back to Ferguson. The protests in Ferguson always got amped up when the TV cameras got on, right? And usually at night. I mean, dude, I remember watching. I couldn't believe it some of those nights for like a week straight. You're just watching the police officers on one side, you're watching the protesters, and you just thought you're watching a ticking time bomb. But let's be real, those protests during the day, or if the TV cameras weren't on, or the helicopters weren't there, or CNN wasn't there, I do feel like a lot of this is people with their cell phones. Oh, it's cool to protest. Oh, it's cool to break up the protest. Anyway, let's move on to dog killing. Um, so Kristi Noem is the Michael Vick now of politics, and I do think this is where, after all this divisiveness, we can come together. It does seem like there's one thing that Democrat, Republicans, and Independents can agree on, and that is you can't kill a dog, right? We can agree on something, Eric. You can't kill a dog.
It seems yeah, it seems like it. It's so interesting. After this excerpt came out from her book, her upcoming book, where she talked about killing her 14-month-old puppy named Cricket about 2 decades ago, I think. First of all, that was an incredible miscalculation to think that you could put that in a book and it would just I mean, I don't know what the hell she was thinking because the reason Kristi Noem is important, other than being the governor of South Dakota, is I think she would have been my pick as the person that I thought if you said gun to my head, who do I think Trump would pick as VP? Most of the year, that has been my pick. I he really liked Kristi Noem, and you could tell they campaigned together. Also, she didn't run against him in the primary, and she specifically said, "I'm not doing it because I don't think I can beat him." And he brought that up. Like that's something Trump loves, right? Someone who's willing to kiss the ring. And so she's a female. She's attractive to a lot of people. She had kind of was developing a national profile. Like I think she could have been the pick. And if you look at the betting odds, we talk about betting odds. She was running a strong second to Tim Scott in the betting odds to be the vice president before Trump's vice presidential pick before this news broke. Now she is. I'm looking at the latest ranking. She is now at 3.1%, tied with Ron DeSantis for the fifth best odds right now to be the nominee. So she went from like 15, 16%, second best odds, now to 3%, tied for the fifth. Basically no chance because of this issue. And it is interesting. Now, it's funny because I started just checking her like social media posts. When she would post anything on Instagram, like even about the protests and kind of calling them out, every comment would be, "How's Cricket? What? I hope Cricket can forgive you. Why did you kill your dog?" I mean, people just ripping her relentlessly, every comment. And she's trying to walk it back. She tried to or explain it, I should say. She did an interview last night where she said, well, the dog was dangerous. It had killed a bunch of chickens. I was afraid for my kids. I don't know, man. I don't think people are buying that. Like you can always I don't know. I didn't live on a farm or a ranch, growing up. So maybe this is common when you had a dog. I don't know. Like, is this what people do? Like, if a dog is misbehaving and you can't trade it, do you just shoot them? I don't know. Maybe that's what people do. But to me, I don't know. If I had a dog who I thought maybe was dangerous, I'd probably try to find it a new home, take it to the shelter. Like, my first thought wouldn't be, where's a gravel pit? Let me get my gun.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think because you mentioned her chance to be the VP, and it was right there behind Tim Scott, and now maybe Tim Scott is going to be the guy. But I also thought she could be a president down the road. Now I know there was some talk of an affair with Corey Lewandowski last year or so. People can Google that. And look, it's not like having an affair is going to disqualify you from being the president.
Yeah.
I do wonder if she, and when I say this, when I say can she come back from this, I don't mean to be the VP. I think this thing is so fresh, and I think the election is 6 7 months away. I think she's dead on arrival, like cricket, pun intended, to be the VP. But I do wonder, do you think can she ever have a national political career after this? And I think she can. I say that because I made the joke about Michael Vick. Michael Vick was an absolute pariah, and then he went back to the NFL, and I feel like I see him on TV now. He's breaking down football games, and this is a guy who basically led a dogfighting ring where I think they were. I don't know if he did it. I can't remember the story, but they were electrocuting. I feel like drowning dogs, and again, I don't remember exactly who did it, so I apologize. But if Michael Vick can come back and talk about football on a network, I wonder. Do you think Kristi Noem is her political future just done?
Ooh, I don't know. It's one thing to watch someone on TV. It's another one to vote for them for like a
Yeah.
high position, especially president. But I mean, it's not. Again, I think Noam had a very good chance to be the pick. I thought she would have been the pick. You never know with Trump, right? But so he's only going to serve one more term. hopefully, if he wins. The Constitution, let's say, prevents him from serving any more terms other than one more. So you can very easily imagine a world where she's picked as vice president, Trump wins, and then she's the front runner for the Republican nomination then in 2028. And she wins the nomination. So, yes, she was on the potential path to becoming president. And it is weird to think that an incident that happened 20 years ago with a dog has potentially derailed someone who otherwise may have someday been the president. But I think that's exactly what happened. I just haven't. If she comes out and does a full mea culpa, I'm really sorry. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done this. I thought it was doing the right thing at the time. And time passes. We've seen people come back from a lot of things in politics, including Trump himself, right? So I wouldn't completely roll it out. But I just think the way Americans are kind of obsessed with dogs, dare I say, across the political spectrum. If there's one thing that unites us, I mean, there are people who treat their dogs as well or better than their kids. I mean, we love dogs, Republican, Democrat, Independent. I just find it hard to believe. I think this is the unforgivable sin of politics now, if there is one, is harming an animal. I just can't imagine her coming back and having a national profile again.
Yeah, see, I don't think, and this is kind of out of the Trump playbook. I'm not saying she's 100% Trumpian, but I don't think she can go the apology route. I think she has to really hammer down this dog was violent, it was eating chickens, it was a danger to my kids route. I think that, and even if that's a lie, by the way, I don't know. I wasn't there with old McDonald on the farm, but I would go that route. And it also, because this woman did seem to be very politically savvy. Like here's what I'll say. I I pay attention to politics, through social media, and there's a lot of clowns. I think we'd both agree. There are a lot of clowns on both sides. And sometimes I feel like, if I see a senator or a congressperson and I don't know their name, I automatically think better of them, because I'm thinking this person probably
Right.
is a serious person who's not doing all the stupid stuff on social media, who's not trying to make everything about them and political theater. And so for me, I always thought that Kristi Noem seemed like a very savvy politician because I can't say anything bad about her until this. I knew her name. I know she's attractive, obviously. I know she's a governor. I know her name is always thrown out there, but I feel like she was a pretty likable, reasonable person. Now maybe I just missed. I don't know all of her policy platforms, but I feel like if she was super, super um, on either side, super severe or radical, I would have known about it. You know what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
I feel like it really shows some tone deafness. Why would you even think of putting this in the book? Right? This is one you
Yeah.
just yeah, I'm just gonna leave this one out.
Right. Don't mention the dog killing. Seems like politics 101. And the fact that she even wrote in the book, apparently, this might not be smart politically for me to say this. Yeah, I have no idea. And that you are being considered and you are one of the favorites to be the vice president of the United States. It's crazy.
Let's finish on this. You sent me the article about so Donald Trump and in talking about political violence, and I mean it's a longer interview, but he basically says it depends. It depends on how the election goes, and he says, "Oh, we're going to win. We're way ahead." But if they do the same things they did last time, it depends. And this is one of the things with Trump that pisses me off. You just say look, there's no place for violence ever in politics. It's easy. It's as easy as what you said earlier for Biden just saying you're allowed to protest, you can't protest violently. And this is where Trump does this on purpose. He does it on purpose, right? Because in my opinion, he wants his folks to be violent if it doesn't go the right way. And I still believe, I think he liked what happened on January 6th. I think that's why he didn't tweet for a while. And the first tweet was Mike Pence didn't do his job. I think he liked what happened. And I think, look, I think if he loses, I don't think he minds if there's political violence again. That's how I feel. And he does it on purpose.
Yeah, look, I at this point, if he does lose, that seems to be the way we're going. I mean, sadly, hopefully we'll be prepared for it. But, and the fact that so he did this long interview with Time Magazine. And to his credit, there were some encouraging things in there. He said he would respect Supreme Court decisions as president. He said he would not try to seek, we were talking about earlier, a third term, in violation of the Constitution. So those are good. But you're right. The answer to that question, I mean, think about what the answer to that question is. Will you support the election if you lose? Will you encourage any kind of anarchy or rioting if you lose? The obvious answer to that question is not, well, we'll see what happens. No, it is of course not. Like, we live in America. That's not how we do things. We have elections, and as long as those elections are upheld by the courts and there's nothing that would overturn it in court, then of course I will honor the result. I will wish Joe Biden luck, and I will encourage my protesters and my supporters to stand down. Like, that is the obvious answer. That's the only acceptable answer. And when you don't hit that answer, it is wrong. It's just wrong because it encourages people. And also in the interview, he said again that he's weighing pardoning every one of his supporters accused of attacking the Capitol on January 6th, more than 800 of whom, by the way, have now pled guilty or been convicted of a jury. Several hundred more are facing trial. So I think that shows you where his head is at on that issue. And this Time article was interesting because it wasn't about 2020. It wasn't even really about this election. It wasn't about the trials. I mean, think about when we talk about Trump, we usually talk about one of those things. This was about what would your second term be like? What are the things you would do? And if you read the article, some of the things, and one thing Trump does is as we know, he's not really great at articulating. I think some of that is intentional. He's intentionally vague, and I think some of it is just it's not really his strength. So he doesn't really come out and say with specificity, but a lot of his supporters and the people who are lining up to help him have come out and said, and one of the things they want to do is they want to allow the president to fire employees of the federal government who are not political appointees, who are there because of their merits and are there from administration to administration. They don't switch when it's Republican and Democrat. He wants to be able to fire them. They are protected right now by civil service laws, and he wants to eliminate that and try to install loyalists throughout the government. I mean, this is what he wants to do. Like, you may think it's a good idea or not, but I think as we get closer to the election, one thing Biden, I think, needs to do and would be helpful to him is to paint the picture of what the kinds of things that Trump is considering or his people are considering in a second term, and how that differs from how America has conducted itself in the past. I mean, another thing in here, potentially firing U.S. attorneys who don't carry out his orders to prosecute someone. That's something he's considering. That would be unprecedented. That is not done right now in America. And so I think we focus a lot on the past, and we should. What happened in the past is important. And we focus a lot on the economy, and we should. But it's also important to paint the picture for both candidates of what you would do in your second term and what your opponent would do. And if you read this Time Magazine article, there's a lot of ammo in here for Biden and his people to do that with Trump.
All right, let's end on that note. We have a hard out today. We'll go a little shorter. We'll be back earlier next week to do another podcast. Eric, thank you very much. Everybody watching, please comment, like, subscribe, share the videos, share the channel, put them in your group text, put them on social media. Let's help grow this thing. Eric, we will see you next week, buddy.